Our New Testament lesson this morning comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verses 14 through 29. Hear now the word of the Lord. King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying, John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him. But others said, it is Elijah, and others said, it is a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, who I beheaded, has been raised. For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, and he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests, and the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it. And he solemnly swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half of my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? She replied, the head of John the Baptizer. Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was deeply grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for his guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison and brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl. The girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. The word of the Lord. It seems that America loves a good drama. When I was young, some of you may remember this. Remember Peyton Place? The guilty pleasure of adult television viewers? Well, we've had daytime dramas, soap operas, if you will, for many years now. The Secret Storm, The Guiding Light, Days of Our Lives, The Young and the Restless. And if the story involves rich and powerful, they seem to be even more popular. Who remembers the Ewings of Dallas? Or the Carringtons of Dynasty? Or maybe now the Daltons of Yellowstone? Well, we're not alone in liking drama. The British brought us Downton Abbey. In Mexico, one of the top-rated shows is, well, can't pronounce it. I should be able to pronounce it. But The Ungovernable. It's about a president and a first lady who are facing a scandal, among other challenges. In France, one of the top shows is Camelot, about King Arthur and greed and cowardice and chivalry. Today's passage in Mark tops them all. It's one of the juiciest and most vile accounts you'll ever encounter about power, corruption, and accountability. The relationship of the players in the story is so complicated. I wish I had a big blackboard here, and I would draw boxes for all the family members, and there would be lines and dotted lines, crisscrossing, the whole thing. It's a mess. So let's set the scene. It's the castle of Macarius. It stood on a lonely ridge surrounded by deep ravines and overlooking the east side of the Dead Sea. It was one of the most gloomy and unassailable fortresses in the world. I've been told if you visit it today, you can still see the dungeons and the hooks in the wall where the chains from the prisoners were hung. And it was there that the last act of John the Baptist's life was played out. Next, let's look at the characters. This is a tangled mess of Herod's family. There were interrelations so complicated that it's darn near impossible to map out. When Jesus was born, Herod the Great was king. He was the king that was responsible for the slaughter of the children in Bethlehem. Herod was married many times. Towards the end of his life, he became so paranoid about losing power to a member of his family that it was written, "It is safer to be Herod's pig than to be his son." As the character Ari Gold, the Hollywood agent on the TV show Entourage, put it, "You don't have any power until you have all the power." Well, first Herod married Doris. They had a son named Antipater, whom he had murdered. Then he married Marianne, and they had two sons, Alexander and Aristobulus, whom he also had killed. Herodias, who is the villainess of today's passage, was the daughter of Aristobulus. Herod then married another Marianne, and they had a son named Herod Philip. Herod Philip married Herodias, who was the daughter of his half-brother Aristobulus, which means he married his niece. They had a daughter named Salome, who is the dancing girl in today's passage. Herod the Great next married Malthalki, with whom he had two sons, Archelaus and Herod Antipas. It is this son, Herod Antipas, who is the Herod in today's passage and who was the ruler of Galilee. Herod Philip, who was the father of Salome, you're keeping all this straight, right? Yeah. Had inherited none of Herod the Great's territories, so he lived as a wealthy private citizen in Rome. Herod Antipas went to Rome to visit Herod Philip, where he seduces Herodias and persuades her to leave her husband and to marry him. So before we go on, let's see if we have a good understanding of who Herodias was. She was the daughter of her half-brother Aristobulus, and therefore the niece of her new husband, Herod Antipas. She was also the wife of his half-brother, Herod Philip, so she was also the sister-in-law of Herod Antipas. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Herod Antipas had previously been married to a daughter of the king of the Nabateans, an Arabian country. She had escaped and run back to her father, who then invaded Herod's territory to avenge his daughter's honor, and in doing so, heavily defeated Herod. To complete the picture, Herod the Great married Cleopatra of Jerusalem, not the Cleopatra of Egypt. She had died about 60 years earlier. While Herod the Great and Cleopatra had a son, Philip the Tetrarch. That Philip was married to Salome, who, at the same time, was the daughter of Herod Philip, his half-brother, and the daughter of Herodias, who herself was the daughter of Aristobulus, another of the half-brothers. That makes Salome simultaneously Herod Antipas's wife, sister-in-law, niece, and also his grandniece. Seldom in history have we ever seen such a series of matrimonial entanglements. And all of this reminded me of that old song by Ray Stevens, some of you might remember. It begins this way. Now, many years ago, when I was 23, I was married to a widow who was pretty as can be. The widow had a grown-up daughter who had hair of red. My father fell in love with her, and soon the two were wed. This made my dad my son-in-law and changed my very life. My daughter was my mother because she was my father's wife. And the song goes on, and At the end, they have a baby, and in the end, the person discovers he's his own grandfather. He's his own grandpa. Now, on some level, this is all kind of funny, but this is where it turns to tragedy. By marrying his brother's wife, Herod had broken the Jewish law and had outraged people with his lack of decency and morality. But who would speak up to the king? Would someone from within the royal palace dare speak up? No, they would not. Would the populace arise in protest? No, they would not. Then who would? Who would stand up on principle and publicly rebuke the king? John the Baptist. John had the courage to speak truth to power, to rebuke evil wherever he saw it, which is what he did. And because of it, John was arrested. Now Herod, he kind of liked John. Well, at least he respected him. He knew he was a man of sincerity and goodness, and he liked to talk with him. But Herodias, his wife, she was different. She couldn't stand the public humiliation. She was hostile towards John, and she wanted him eliminated. She got her chance at Herod's birthday party. At the party, surrounded by courtiers and captains, she got Salome to dance. The licentious dance should have been demeaning for the royal family. But Herod kind of liked it. So much so that he offered a reward, any reward, just name it. So Herodias finally got her chance to get her wish. And she tells Salome to ask for the head of John the Baptist. And as a result, John the Baptist was executed. And in this, the qualities of each of the characters in this story are revealed. Herod. Herod was an odd mixture. He feared John, but he respected him. He liked listening to him, but he dreaded what he might say. Herod would hate the message, but he was fascinated by hearing it. Herod was a man who acted on impulse. He made the reckless promise to Salome without thinking. He may have been more than just a little drunk at the time, but he did not think before he spoke. And he put himself in a position for which he would later be very sorry. Herod feared what people might say if he didn't go through with it. He feared losing power. Despite knowing that it was the wrong thing to do, he kept his promise to Salome. He had made that promise to her in front of his cronies, and fearing them laughing at him or thinking he was weak, were he to back down from his promise, he carried through. He lacked the moral courage to do what was right. Let's look at Herodias. She was loyal to Herod. Later on, Herod gets exiled and sent to Gaul. Herodias is told that she doesn't have to be banished as well, but she proudly answered that where her husband went, she would go too. Her pride was both her strength and her weakness. And she shows us what an embittered and embarrassed person is capable of doing. Salome, the daughter, is complicit with her mother to eliminate the one person who could remind them of the moral law. John was murdered so that they could all sin in peace. She forgot that she would still have to face God, even though she no longer had to deal with John the Baptist. And John the Baptist, a man of courage, A guy from out in the desert, eating locusts and honey, thrown into a dark dungeon. He preferred death to falsehood. He lived for the truth, and he died for it. But what he faced was maybe not so unique. In our lives, maybe we don't have such serious consequences, but we still face situations where the truth may not be popular. Many a person might silence their conscience, but John stood for what was right. So the purpose of all this story is to ask, what about you? What would you speak against? What would you stand up for? Would you stand up for your country? Would you stand up for your family? Would you stand up for your faith? Would you? Do you? To God be the glory, both now and forever. Amen.